Today is February 27th, 2007. We are at the Warhawk Air Museum, Nampa, Idaho. My name is Sue Paul, and I'm going to be conducting a Veterans History Project interview in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Today I will be interviewing Mr. Bill Lofholm, who was a civilian with Morrison Knutson during World War II, serving in Alaska. Welcome to the Warhawk Air Museum, sir. It's an honor to have you here. Could you tell us, please, where you were born and the date that you were born?
I was born in Loup City, Nebraska, at August 21st, 1913.
And what is your full name, sir? Your full name. Do you go by William or Bill?
No, Bill.
Okay.
My full name is Lyle, and I never have used it. My whole history, even my passports for overseas had Lyle, but in parenthesis Bill, and that's it. My whole school records are all in Bill.
Okay.
Lyle was named after one of my dad's favorite sisters, and they thought I was going to be a girl, and I fooled them.
Well, that must be why you glared at me when I asked you for your full name. Could you tell us, please, what your current address is?
523 South Pine Street in Nampa, Idaho.
And, sir, could you tell us what years you served as a civilian during World War II and where you served?
Well, I first was working on war projects in Camp Roberts in California. This is in 1940. And I was in charge of one of the divisions. There was 9 divisions. I had the railroad division and the equipment division. We had 823 pieces of equipment. We had 11,000 men working, and we built Camp Roberts in a matter of about 6 months.
And then you moved into Alaska.
And I went to Alaska before the war in early 1941.
All right. And then you stayed there until what year?
1952.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Also present in the room, the photographer is Al Musia, and also present is Sus Helpenstill. Bill, you were born in Loup City, Nebraska in 1913. Did you grow up there?
Yes, graduated from high school in 1931.
Did you have sisters and brothers?
I had one brother.
And what did your father do for a living?
My father was a merchant clothing store until the Depression, and then he was the county clerk until he died in office. My brother died when he was 49, and my dad died at 54, and I'm 93 now, so what the...
So you were living in Nebraska during the Depression, and tell me your memories of that.
Terrible. People this day and age don't realize what the Depression was, and particularly back in that country where the Dust Bowl was out there. And that's when I went to work for MK in '36. That was one of the PWA, Public Works Administration, irrigation projects on the Loup River.
So you were, as a child growing up in the early 1920s in school, this sort of thing, that was right in the middle of the Depression.
Oh, yeah.
Did you go to a small school? Was Loup a small town?
Well, Loup City is the county seat of Sherman County, but it's 1,500 people or less, so it's not a very big city.
Mm-hmm. And in spite of the Depression and going without everything, pretty much, did you have favorite things that you enjoyed in school?
Well, I enjoyed music. Our town was blessed with a professor of music similar to what we have in Nampa now, and his name was Snyder. And we were a small school. We had about 160 students in the high school, and we were the state champions of the Class C, but we took on every school in the state except Lincoln High. We couldn't beat them.
What instrument did you play?
French horn. I started out with a mellophone with the right hand, and then they transferred to the. So I followed it, and what it did for me was the fact that I was not very favorable to mathematics. And I had to pass, and Miss Fox was my mathematics teacher, and God bless her. She pounded it in my head, and I got, with the music, help, and that's where I ended up in my life. Then that was, I needed it.
And so in high school, you pretty much majored, the music was your main extracurricular?
No, I took the regular curriculum. I wasn't very good at it, but that was it. I wasn't the star performer. I was good in athletics. I was the captain of the basketball team, which was not very good either, but then I played football and my track. But
what was your little town like during the Depression?
well, people were tough. It was tough going. But they all come together. They all come together and give. I had a big family. My dad had a big family there, and every one of them. Some of them lived on the farms. They couldn't get enough produce to make it go, but they lived there, and they always had a pig or a cow and milk and that kind of things. And people shared in those days. It was entirely. There was no government agencies like you have now. No food stamps or anything like that. They just had to come together. And it's an experience that some of these younger folks have to go through to see.
When you graduated from high school,
Yeah.
what do you remember what year you graduated from high school?
1931.
So 1931, and what did you just do after you graduated from high school?
I went into the Civilian Conservation Corps. I was one of the first ones out of the county. And I was not very big, and it was run by the military, it was like a military thing, but you had everything. And when they went to Fort Crook in Omaha, and they put a tent camp up, and then they split the kids up to 200 to each unit. 200 members in each unit. And they selected the leaders and the assistant leaders by size and ignorance. I called it. It was the Army. And we got $30 a month. And $25 went home to your folks, and you got $5. But $5 in those days was a lot of money when I was not used to having anything.
And that program helped bring America out of the Depression, didn't
yeah.
it? It put a lot of people to work.
They should have it now. There's many, many projects that were built that still stand.
Our national parks, for one.
Yeah.
Did you what projects did you work on?
I was in Chadron State Park, and I go back there every year, or every 2 years.
And what did you work on in the park?
Well, my history with the Corps was 6 months after I was in, they promoted me to a sub-leader. Now, they took the 200 members, split them into 100 camps, and then split them to 50, and a sub-leader was there and was in charge of the 50. And that guy got $36 a month then, and $25 on home, but look what I had left. Then I was in charge. There was a Pennsylvania Dutchman by the name of Van Vleck that took me under his wing. He taught me to use the carpenter rule, lay out rafters and do that. I can lay out rafters, and they don't do that anymore. And he put me in charge of that. Then we sawed our own lumber and built the cabins. There's 6 of them still standing in that place.
And what is the name of the park?
Chadron State Park.
And that is located in what state?
Nebraska, Northwest. It's a blue-black cat extension of the hills. The White River divides the Black Hills, White River Plain of about 35 miles across, flatter than a fritter, and then comes up to the hills, and it lays all along the western part of Nebraska. It's quite a beautiful place. A lot of people don't realize it.
How long were you in the Corps?
2 years.
And so were you 18 when you went into the Corps?
I was 18.
When you were 20 in 1933, then it would have been. What did you do?
I came out, I was there 3 years. I was in Chadron. Then I was transferred to Red Cloud in the Republican River after the big flood they had there, and we put in a lot. I was in charge of that. After I was become the sub leader, about 3 months later, I got to be a leader, 100, and that was $45. And a $20 bill on every month is a lot of money.
And so let's move you forward a little bit in time. So within 3 years, then did you decide to leave the Corps, or did you for other choices?
I just left because I was going to go to school. Now another thing that happened, there was 12 guys in the Corps that was selected to go to Chadron Normal College, which is now the Chadron State University. It's in Chadron. And we were chosen to go there, and we would go in at night to night school. Ride to Chadron in an old Dodge Army truck with a canvas top in the dead of winter. 5 of us completed our courses, and they were restricted. 3 you could take. We took mathematics and all. So I went to that for 2 years. Then the 5 of us, we finished, and I left, and I was transferred to Red Cloud, as I said. Then I went from Red Cloud up to the middle of the sand hills in the lake country in western Nebraska to put in a big steel tower and the wildlife reservation at Mumford. Then I went to Scottsbluff National Monument and worked on the road up to the top. All of that from there. And then when I finished, I quit. Down in the Republican Valley when I was there at Red Cloud, my supervisor eventually became the professor of A&M at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And he took me under his wing and said, you're in charge here, so you're going to have to do all the layout of all these little dams and little drainage structures and landfill. That was a recovery of the drought to protect all the land from running away. And you had to put barriers in these streams and put little watering holes and all of that in. So he gave me an instrument and said, you're going to do it. And he taught me how to do the survey and all of this. And I was going to the University of Nebraska, and he said, he was transferred back, and he said that if I came there, I could get through in a year. Well, I got a job with MK in 1936, and I couldn't quit. I got that job in my hometown, and I started out, and I was sitting around my dad's office. I remember that with my feet on the desk in the courthouse. And in those days, there was a man came around and assigned positions. You had to register, and they assigned you to work. Well, MK come in there on this job of building these canals, and they brought in big equipment. Well, the district was financed by the federal government to such a point that they didn't have enough money, so the district, what they did is they let the contract and made the contractor furnish the help and assistance to their engineer, the district's engineer. So MK called in my dad's office, being the county clerk and having the office, so I this man come in there every 2 weeks. He was there. They called for 6 chainmen. Well, I didn't want to be a chainman because I knew more than that, but my dad, I couldn't do nothing but look at him, and he said, go, and I went to there. And fortunately, it was the best move that ever happened to me. 6 weeks later, MK got the big Keystone Dam, now McConaughey they call it, in western Nebraska. And they transferred the engineer from my project to there, and I got to be the project engineer on the head loop. And the only thing I got was a 1936 Plymouth Coupe to drive. I didn't get any more money, but that was neither here nor there, and that was my start with them.
How large a company was Morrison Knutson at that time?
They were large then. Mm. Well, Morrison Knutson was the premier company in the world, and until Mr. Morrison died, and they put in a guy by the name of Jack Bonney. And the way that Morrison Knutson made their success was they formed districts. And there was a vice president over all of them. And when I was in Nebraska, I was under Wally Puckett. When I was in Alaska, I was under C.R. Shin, both of them masters. Both of them the salt of the earth. And when Morrison wanted to retire, his health was failing, and they selected a new guy, and they selected Jack. He was the youngest vice president at the time, and instead of leaving the work out to the districts, he wanted it all brought into Boise, Ascension.
And the world headquarters was in Boise, Idaho?
Boise, well, that's WG Washington Group International now, and that buildings are all there.
But they've always been here then, Morrison Knutson?
That's where they started.
Okay.
See, Mr. Morrison was with the Bureau of Rec. He was a young engineer on the canals and the irrigation project. And Mr. Knutson was from Nebraska, Newman Grove, and he was a horse and mule contractor. He built railroad grades and that, and he was out here, and they got together and formed the company. Mr. Knutson I got to know real well, and I was married in his niece's home and all, and so that's it.
Where were you December 7th, 1941?
December 7th?
December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl
That
Harbor.
was December 7th.
December 7th, 1941.
Oh, I thought you said 17th. I'm sorry. Well, I was on the SS McKinley out in the Pacific Ocean just off Yakutat coming back for Christmas.
Still working for Morrison Knutson?
Oh, yeah.
In 1940, what projects were you involved in?
That was when I was in the Camp Roberts in California. That was Morrison Knutson.
Tell us about that. Morrison Knutson actually built Camp
They was
Robertson.
A joint venture with Ford J. Thwaites, and they built it. They built it in no time. And as I say, we had 11,000 men on the one side of the river, and across the Nassamana River we had 3,000 at an artillery base they built there. Well, that relocation the camp was one of the largest in the country. And it was, I was working for him on the Los Angeles River job and transferred up there when the river job was finished. And I said, where's this job at? And I drove to Paso Robles. They said, go up the road to San Miguel, and there's one of the old missions there, still there, San Miguel. I said, you go right past San Miguel about 2 miles and look up on the hill and you'll see a tent. And that was it. They was hiring and going. And as I said, we had 823 pieces of equipment. That was my first. I had to sign it and all that.
So that was a big job then for you.
It was great.
1940, did you have any, the buildup of this military camp, did you have any sense that we were going to be going to war?
No, because I was working on the river job in Los Angeles, and that was the first section of the river that was paved in Los Angeles from 1st to 10th Street, right behind the Union Depot, down the river 2 miles to 10th. And we were supposed to build that under the Corps of Engineers. And this is where I got with Colonel DeLong. Slim DeLong was his name then. But he was in charge of that project. And it was supposed to be done in 2 years. And the Corps of Engineers said, well, you can't allow a flood to tear this up, so you got to put a sheet pile halfway in the job and finish one end and then finish the next year. And Slim says, we're going to do it. We didn't. They made us put the sheet pile in, but we finished it. And the floods came just as we were about through, and we had ramps up and off that pavement, and we were busy beating the water, hauling our potty pots up. Then that's when I transferred. I was the last man on the Los Angeles job. All of the debris that we called out of the river and that, we had to widen it and get it ready for the concrete walls and all, was hauled to an old quarry in South Los Angeles. And I was left there, and on Sunday morning I took the last dozer we had before we loaded on a loader to head for Paso Robles. And I went out there and straightened it up, and the city accepted it, put it in, and I gathered up my wife and first boy and headed for Paso Robles.
When did you receive your first assignment to Alaska?
1941.
Was this after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor?
No, this was early spring of 41.
And what was the assignment?
Well, my assignment?
Yes, to Alaska.
I was the fourth man on a totem pole. We had Morrison Knutson had Juneau, Alaska Airport, Mile 13 at Cordova, and Mile 13 was called that. It was out on the old Copper River Northwestern Railroad from the copper mines, 13 miles, so that's the name of it. Then Northway. Northway was just, it's inside the country, the Canadian line border, about 50, 60 miles. There was absolutely no access. The highway goes past right now.
Were those military bases that you were, strips you were putting in, airstrips at that time?
Certainly. And how it was, the Civil Aeronautics, the predecessor, predecessor of the FAA was in Alaska, laying out airports. And they had all the funds was assigned to them by the military. And that continued. And they built them all because they had the engineering know-how and they had the people there to do it. And Northway was one they built. This was prior to the highway even coming through.
How did you get there? How did you get to Northway?
We flew in, and I'll tell you how we got there. We landed at Valdez, our equipment. We went up the old Richardson Highway to Nabesna, which is a mine. And we built an airstrip on the Nabesna Glacier, and we had 70 miles to get to our site. What they did is they took them in, they'd go there, and they walked in. We had 7 or 8 old timers, Norwegians and Yugoslavs in the mining business that was there. They went to work for us. They went in with a float plane to the Nabesna River, which was one end of the runway. Let those guys off, put a camp there. They started cutting brush and leveling. It was a sandy soil until we could get in to land an airplane. Then we started. And everything that went in there went in by 70 miles by air. And you can read of the difficulty of getting the equipment there over land where nobody was there. They had Indian guides. And Nabesna Chief Northway was the head of the Nabesna tribe there, and he was he died here a few years back at 100 and some years.
And he guided the equipment
in? Well, he sent these men and sons and that and all of them. And we got in, and we ended up in the bed.
How did you bring the equipment in over land? Was it by sled or
by you'll have to read it. It was a saga. They said it couldn't be done, but we did it. And that same equipment, after we made the initial, on the December 2nd, I called in to Anchorage and told the CAA the military is take over. There was a sergeant and 19 men there in the camp. Said they're taking over because the field lights are working and the tower is working. It was a beacon tower and the communications, and I'm leaving. And I was the last one. We had 9 of us went in on the Boeing ADA, standing up in the cabin, 30 below, into Fairbanks.
So when the war started, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, where were you?
Well, I said we got into Fairbanks on the 2nd. I hadn't had a bath for 7 weeks. None of the rest of them did, so it didn't make any difference. You all smelled the same. Went into the Nordale Hotel in Fairbanks, which was steam heated. Threw the clothes in the corner and went down to the Northern Commercial and bought all new clothes. I was supposed to come out on Pan American, and they couldn't. They just couldn't. Everybody knew it was going to happen. In Alaska, there was no secret that we were going to have trouble. And so I called. We'd set up an office in Anchorage because at that time, then we had Bethel, McGrath, Antioch, Merrill Coal Bay, and Naknek, besides these other 3 fields. And I called them. They said, get on the boat train. And the boat trains run from Fairbanks to Seward and meet every boat and never take them back up. And they said, we have reservations on the McKinley for you. So I got in, and they met me at the depot at Anchorage and said, here's your tickets. And I went down and got on the McKinley, and we were just off Yakutat when the war broke out. And a peculiar thing in this, McKinley was an old banana boat and should never have been in the Alaska service, but it was. That was all the Alaska steamship had. They had 4 cabins up above, deluxe. One was the captain's, and our deluxe cabin, I had 2 guys with me. We had 1 porthole. That was it to look out of. And we had to come outside and go down alongside to go down to eat in the bottom of the steerage or with the people in the bottom down there. And we were laying, and it was glassy, clear day in the North Pacific, which is very rare at that time. And we were probably 100 miles off Yakutat, heading for Juneau, the Inside Passage. And all of a sudden, somebody come along in a porthole with paint, was painting over the porthole. And we said, what's going on? And these walls in the boat were so thin that we could hear the captain on the thing, and we knew. He had been directed to go to Juneau. And we went into Juneau and laid there several days until they formed a convoy. All the boats come in from the North Pacific into there. And
was there an urgency right away that the Japanese might come into that area?
Well, they knew we would.
Mm-hmm.
The secret is the air bases we built at Coal Bay and at Umnak. They was under construction at that time, and what happened was everything went there and it was called a cannery company. So when the stuff was shipped there and all the communication was called cannery, certain canneries. And when the Japanese came, their fleet came in there, and they wondered where these fighter craft came from. That was one of the things that changed their mind when they left. And then they went down and got on Kiska and had to. That was the one thing that saved the bacon.
Were the fighter airplanes, the airstrips?
Well, they come up and they didn't know there was only 14 of them. and 6 of them Canadian.
Mm.
It was, and I'll tell you, the Aleutian campaign, if you're familiar with it, I've got all the documents, was one of the most costly to the American armed forces in the Pacific. Compared to any other, it was the second greatest loss.
Why was it the most costly?
Well, they had to. The Japanese had dug in and sat there up on the mountains in the snow and that. And
the airstrips that you built then during the war years, were those? It was an urgency, wasn't it, to get those finished?
Yes, we had. That's how. That was the forward thinking of Colonel DeLong, or he went into the Army then. They called him in. He was a full colonel, and he was the one that located all the works in the Aleutians down there on the bases, and we followed him. Slim, he and Mr. Morrison and Mr. Shin, who the vice president, they knew that we had to have aircraft up there. So that's how we started. We bought everything or hired everybody when the war broke out. The local bush pilots couldn't get fuel, they was stopped, so they come to work for us and sold them. We had practically every bush pilot in Alaska.
That worked for Morrison Knutson during those years?
And we built the first hangar out there in Merrill Field. We fixed Merrill Field. It was our headquarters there. We had our office, our shops and all. And when that fire come, then we replaced the hangar, and the hangar's still there.
Cordova.
That was one of the first 3.
I'm going to just show some pictures that you brought in. This is one that says, first lighted CAA Alaskan field built by MK at Cordova. This is one. This one says, aviation supports the ground forces. And these are the airplanes that were able to come in.
Where is this at?
And this one is, it's in the planes that MK brought in.
Oh.
In support of the ground forces. Probably the Morrison Knutson forces that were building the strips.
See, in 1941, we got our first airplane. That was a Howard, high wing, fast for those days, and it was not suitable for Alaska. And we left it on the airfield at Cordova, on the old city airfield. Guy landed. Herman Lerdahl was the guy's name, and he became one of the chief pilots of the Northwest Airlines on the Pacific Run. I've got a book of his. And he was a great guy.
This one says MK built airport, saved Alaska, which
That's
is exactly.
The one, Cold Bay.
This is.
That's the history of it.
After MK took a 400,000 chance, U.S. planes took to the air and the Jap fleet took to its heels. Did you ever see any of the Japanese forces there?
No, but I saw some of their wreckage.
What did you see?
In the Aleutians. See, we then, after the invasion, or before the invasion of Attu and that, we were building them airfields down in the Aleutians. Adak, Umnak, and I forget where all. See, I went up there, as I say, number 4, because Slim DeLong was a good friend of mine. His brother and his older brother was there. Slim DeLong's name was Schlickeisen. And he said, that's too long, I'm changing my name to DeLong. And Colonel DeLong, then he went in as a full colonel, Corps of Engineers. He was a great friend of the generals up there. And the general he was killed in the, later in the South Pacific, damn it. Famous general of the family. That's what happens to you. Your mind goes blank. I can see them. And Slim, then his brother Slick went by Slickeisen, went by that name, and Felix Slick, or Bob Gibo, was the engineer. He was the number 2. Then Slick was number 3, and I was number 4. And the reason I was very close to DeLong and Slickeisen and worked with them in Nebraska and in the Los Angeles River and all. Well, the Slickeisen, what happened in 42, there was no communications in Alaska. There was nothing. And it was very important for the military, so MK took a contract with the CAA to provide communications. And they started right at Yakutat Beach, which is halfway between Yakutat and Cordova. And then we had that job, and then we had out at Middleton Island, and there's 98% of the Alaskans don't know where Middleton Island is. It's a little island 2 miles long and about a quarter of a mile wide, out right in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska. Then we had Middleton. We went from Middleton. Then we had one in the entrance to the pass through at Whittier, North Dutch Island. Then the next one we had was at Chiricahua Island, which is 200 miles off the south end of Kodiak Island. Then Sandpoint, then Unga, opposite Cold Bay. Well, I and Slick was going to be in charge of them, and the MK took the contract, a firm contract for the military, which was very risky, but they'd build in, because we figured at every landing place we were going to lose a barge. Just going to put them on the beach, and that was it. Everything that we needed in those projects, including the 135-foot towers and the houses and the engine, everything even the camp for our men had to be on that barge. Well, at that time, I had a kind of a memory that I could figure out all of the things that had to be used. I don't know what it was. I don't have it anymore. I can't even find my way in the home on the rooms. But anyway, Slick was older than I quite a bit, but his wife was a young girl from Nebraska, and he just had his son. And Slick and I were very close. So I'd gone down to Seattle to load out the barges for these things. And then I was returning because we'd sent the fleet out with those barges. And I flew to to Juneau, and I went into the Baranoff Hotel, and Slick was there. And he was going south. His health wasn't very good. And we roomed together. We kept rooms in the Baranoff because we worked up and down the coast. And Slick got up. He was leaving on Pan American the next day, and I was going to take the MK plane up to Cordova to be when they landed out in Middleton. And Slick left on Pan American before me in the morning, and when he left the hotel, I went in and said, "Slick, what's all these clothes of here in the closet?" They were winter clothes. He said, "Well, I won't need them where I'm going," and that was no indication of what was going to happen to him. He went down and he took his physical, and it was proven he didn't have cancer, but he had ulcers, and that was from drinking a quart of whiskey a day. And he was driving home with Slim's wife, Slim DeLong, his brother's wife, across the old high bridge in Seattle. And he said, "Just a minute," and he pulled it over and went over the side. didn't hit the water, he hit a piling, and so it was a mess. And there
He drove the car off the bridge?
No,
he got out of the car.
Got out of. He pulled it into the curb. He was going home. She'd taken him from the doctor, and he'd got his results.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And I'll never know. Nobody knows what it was, and I had no indication.
Mm.
So there I was stuck. I then become in charge of that.
That whole project.
That whole project.
And taking all those barges onto the different islands?
We put them on and on the beaches, and we never lost one, and we made so much money that Mr. Shin, with our association with the CAA, tried to give him back $1 million. Now, $1 million in 1941 is a lot of money.
Why did he try to do that?
Well, we'd made too much money, but then that was a gamble. If we'd lost barges, we wouldn't have. Morrison Knutson was an outstanding group. They were outstanding.
When you say that you saw the effects of the Japanese, or the remnants of the Japanese, what did you see?
Well, I saw Dutch Harbor and what damage they'd done there and all, and then I never saw anything more because they didn't do any more damage except shooting down American airplanes, and then I saw their airplanes, and of course on that too, that was all of the wreckage they had there and that, and so.
Now, you saw American airplanes being ferried to Russia that came through that area. They landed on your airstrips on Morrison Knutson.
That was Northway was the first airport in the States.
Tell us about that.
Well, during the war, this Lend-Lease, they started out at Edmonton, and they'd come up to the airports in Canada, and ours was Northway, then Big Delta, then Fairbanks, and that's where the Russians took them over in Fairbanks. Then Galena, then Denome, and then they hop across. And the airport at Northway was the first one. And then I've seen a time and weather when airplanes were backed up at Northway, 25 of them at a time on the field because they couldn't go on. There's no place to go. And they were all the way back. Mm. And they'd be A-20s, A-25s, P-40s, and C-47s was the biggest, what they were sending them. And then they put in a big place for them in Fairbanks, and when they'd come in, as I say, they'd land in there with a C-47 that they'd hauled them. Those pilots had come in, and they were the funniest looking people you've ever seen. No, their uniforms, I don't mean them, but the boots and baggy, they was built for the Arctic, and the baggy pants, and they would come in and get ready, and they'd go out, and they were not used to flying an American aircraft that had excess power. These
were Russian pilots?
Russian pilots.
That were trained there?
Well, they come and took over right there at Fairbanks. And so when they would take off from Fairbanks, they would go out full bore, full engine. And they thought that was wonderful. And they lost quite a few of them, but the losses were not major, but they lost some in weather and crashes going over there. It was almost 8,000 airplanes went through there.
Did you ever see any women pilots, any of the WASPs that came through?
Not the Russian pilots. Then we had women.
The WASPs?
I guess that's
Americans, the women, they were called the WASPs.
Yeah, they was flying the aircraft to, they was pick them up at the factory and take them to all the way to Fairbanks and there. But most of them were men that was doing it, but there was some women. That reminds me of the first guy that I knew who flew an airplane was in Nebraska, Jack Jefford, who became the chief pilot for the CAA in Alaska. And he was a famous, he ran a flying school about 30 miles from where I was born and raised in Nebraska at Broken Bow. And then he had the first woman student that the airport in Grand Island, Nebraska is named after. She was one, and she was killed in the crash. And that airport is named after. Mm. And then he comes to Alaska, and I got to know him real well.
Was your wife and you had how many children by this time?
2. I had 1 when I went to Alaska, and 1 was born in Alaska.
So your family moved with you to Alaska,
yeah.
and
well,
where did they live?
In Anchorage. They couldn't come up to Alaska because they sent all the women out, that was not necessary or wasn't permanent citizens there until after the Japs were stopped. And so then they could come up to Alaska, and she came up in 43 and with my other son. Then our youngest son was born in the old Providence Hospital in Anchorage. And the first house I ever owned was in 807 H Street, now is in the heart of Anchorage. Mm. So.
Did you like living in Alaska?
I enjoyed it because of the association and the people I had. And my association with the CAA, the Army, and the railroad.
How long did you all live in Alaska then? You stayed there until
52.
So you went. So tell me about when the war ended. What was it like?
Well, that's
after the bomb was dropped and the war was stopped.
I was left up in Alaska by Mr. Shin, the vice president. Says there's not going to be any work in Alaska anymore, so let's dispose of everything. So I was left to dispose of everything. We sold our hangar and that to Pacific Aeromotive from Los Angeles. They were a company that provided our annual care of our airplanes down there. We'd fly down every year at Christmas time, one of them, and they'd change everything. And so when we said you're going to get rid of it, so I got rid of everything and got rid of I had some old tractors, equipment that was no good back there. We'd sold our hangar, we sold our office, everything at the airport. We had nothing left. And then I got a call from Colonel DeLong, the Corps of Engineers at the Fort Richard Elmendorf Field. Said, Bill, I want you to come out here to see me. So I went out to see. He said, I got 3 jobs I want you to do. And I said, what do you mean, want me to do? I got nothing. He said, I want you to do it. And I said, what are they? He said, well, one of them, we know that you have a good friend and a guy who works for you that's the top steel man, is to put up a bunch of tanks for the POL system for Elmendorf Field. I want some housing for non-commissioned members. I want 200 units and 100, but duplexes. And then he said, I want the headquarters building built.
And this was in Alaska? He wanted you to go back to Alaska. And did you know why they wanted all of that?
Well, the general was there at the time, become the chief of staff back in Washington, D.C. afterwards. He had money and he wanted some housing for his people. They didn't have it, and they didn't have fuel facilities, and then they wanted a new headquarters. And so I said, well, what do I do? He said, you're going to do it. And so I said, well, just let me go back. And I had to get on the telephone and call Ray Shin in Seattle and said, Ray, what do I do now? Here's these jobs. Well, he said, go down to the railroad and see if they got some property and buy them. And that's still there. That our headquarters is still there. It's a small equipment dealership now.
And so Morrison Knutson entered into another contract then with the military to build these things.
We built those. Then because what happened was the big buildup, the Cold War. We actually had more work after the war and the buildup than we did then.
And what were you building after the war?
Airports and everything else. Then we took the railroad. Was wore out. It wasn't. We didn't build it. It was wore out. But MK had big reputation on railroad construction, so they got the funds from the $84 million from Uncle Sam to it belonged to Uncle Sam at the time, you know, the Alaska Railroad, and to rebuild it. So we built a new terminal in Fairbanks. We built the engine house in Anchorage. We did all the track raising, replaced all the rail, and did the first section to Whittier, down through the lowered the railroad down into the bay, and to put the highway that goes to Whittier and to Seward now up on the top hill, and that was quite a job.
And all of that was done in a period of about, what, 8 years?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Then we had a lot of work out at Elmendorf, and we built the power plant at that, and then we built the Eielson Air Base, the secret air base. Nobody could talk about what it was.
Where was that located?
Mile 26 below Fairbanks. It's a big base up there right now.
Did you know it was a secret air base at the time?
Well, we knew it because it pounded in your head.
Did they?
And you know what it was? It eventually turned out to be the base for the B-36, the old B-36 airplane for the atomic bomb for Russia. That's why it was secret. It was 2 parallel runways, 7,500 foot long, along the Alaska Highway, parallel. It's still there, a great big base. They built a hangar. We didn't build that, but it would take 2 of these big B-36s. The B-36s didn't last over a couple of years, you know. They're the old piston airplanes, but they had assists on the end of the wings. They're a tremendous big airplane, and that was what it was for.
To take an atomic bomb to Russia, to drop
That was what it was for. It was against Russia.
Did you have any problems switching from the Russian pilots being our allies during World War II to their becoming our enemies during the Cold War?
Never had any contact with them after that. Never had any.
There was a fire that you mentioned earlier. I just want to show these pictures because it really took out a lot of your buildings. And what happened with this fire? This was in 1944, June. It was a flash fire. You were telling me about that a little bit earlier at Merrill Field.
Well, see, that was our first hangar. We had our aircraft. We had a complete airplane overhaul facility there. We could have licensed to repair motors and all. It was complete. And when it caught a fire and went that afternoon, I was downtown at the CAA office and saw the great big cloud of smoke way out in the distance. I took out there, and then they stopped me. They wouldn't even let me go. That was our office and everything else there, but it didn't burn, just the hangar. And then we lost those aircraft. Then the military started assigning us aircraft.
You said that, you mentioned Tokyo Rose to me earlier.
Well,
tell us about that.
That night, Tokyo Rose said that Morrison Knutson's hangar had burned in Anchorage, and see, that had crippled their effort. She knew it that fast. They knew it that fast, and we had no idea.
This is a picture, 1943, that I'm going to show of the Morrison Knutson headquarters in
That was
Anchorage.
at Middlefield. That was right next to the hangar.
Okay.
See, we had about 6 apartments upstairs for some of the people to live.
And then this last one is a really great kind of collage of pictures of the Alaska MK work scene, September 1945. It's just kind of a nice overview that I'd like to show.
That's in McGrath, the upper one.
Right. So you came home in 1953, you left Alaska in 1953.
Left MK in 1953.
You left MK. What made you decide to leave MK?
Mr. Bonney. he and I we had a bloody Sunday, we called it. I flew to Anchorage with him in one of our LB-30s.
Go ahead.
He and I had Mr. Shin, the vice president I told you, was a great old man. And he and I worked together. I reported to him, and I reported everything. And that was the way MK worked when they were at their peak. The districts reported to the vice presidents and the vice president. And then every year we had a meeting in Boise of a whole group, and you'd go in and you'd give your previous works. You had what work you had on hand, what was your prognosis of what you were going to have ahead, coming up, and you'd give them this whole report. And then you'd tell them what the equipment you look that you're going to have and the amount of money you're going to have. And that was it. But then they had the liberty of, if you got more work and had to have more money, that was all right. But this was just for budgeting purposes. And when we got, Jack Bonney was the vice president, so he was on the board. I was always sitting next to Shin at the end of the table as a peon. And I'd give my report. Well, Ray Shin, a good old Irishman, just loved to give Jack Bonney the needle, because Jack, as I told you, was an egotist. And he would, Shin say, well, we'll have our Seattle district give their report, and Gil Griffin was in Seattle district, and he was always had good work. They had it on the Columbia River, and so he'd give it, and then he says, now we'll hear from our little district in Alaska. Well, we were the top earners. Not because of anything that I or anybody did, it was just the way that the work was there. And then when I'd get through with my report, then he would turn. Now he said, let's hear from that large Los Angeles district, Jack Bonney, and they was having tough times at that time. Well, Jack just about froze. So when he and I then, he figured that I guess maybe I was a partner of Shin's on him, but I wasn't. So Ray Shin become ill, and he went back to Chicago, took a leave, went back to Chicago for some medical training. Jack Bonney come to me and says, you're reporting to me everything now, you don't report anything. And I said, no, I work for Ray Shin. And that started the downfall. And Jack, being senior, the last year up there was very unpleasant. He sent a fellow up to be a spy, and he was such an alcoholic that when he'd come down to the office about 11 o'clock in the morning from the Anchorage Hotel, and he'd smell so bad that he'd pretty near run all the people out of the office. Well, Jack and I went up there, and he flew up on the airplane. He was after me, and what I did is we got into Anchorage, went down to the office, and we got into a big fight. And he said, you're through. And I said, that's fine, I can't. But he didn't, he made one mistake. The whole crew left. The whole crew.
During your years in Alaska during World War II, were you all aware that MK personnel had been captured on Wake Island?
Yes, I was. Some of the boys worked in the Los Angeles River job. Two McGee brothers were there. They were just about to be inducted into the Army, and a lot of people went over to Wake to escape that. I don't think that because they were good guys. Then Fritz Schaefer from Nampa, Idaho was there. And there were several others, and I can't remember them, but they was hiring them when we were doing the river job and doing the job up at Camp Roberts. And so all the guys went over there.
How many of them were captured?
Oh, There's quite a few. I don't remember how many there was. I've got the history of it and that, and I talked to, of course, Fritz is dead now, but he was right neighbor of mine in Nampa.
What was your impression of the company's reaction, Morrison Knutson's reaction to these people being captured by the Japanese?
They did a lot of things for them. I wasn't close to it because I was in Alaska and they were down here, but they did everything possible they could. And as I say, Morrison Knutson at that time was the premier company in the world.
Was it shocking to you and to your staff, your crew, when you heard about that?
Well, we didn't hear about it until sometime afterwards.
Really?
Because in Alaska we were working and it was different. We heard of probably 6-7 months afterwards when I first knew. And then I knew these two boys quite well. They were about my age and we were working together on the river job.
After you left Morrison Knutson, then in 1952, you, from 1943 to 1952, I'm going to just quickly go through your career. You were the Alaska Division Manager, and that was all during the war years, of course, and then during the Cold War. And then you left Morrison Knutson, went to work for the Foley Brothers, where you were Foley Brothers out of New York, where you were a resident manager, and you were, you were vice president of overseas operation later on with that company, and then you went to work for Central Technology Incorporated at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C., and there you worked, you were a consultant in Australia, it looks like, on a 1,000-mile, or it was 1,000 miles north of Perth on the Indian Ocean, quite exotic. You continued to work for them and until 1977, when you retired, or 1978 when the company was sold. And then you went to work with Central Construction Company, and you were a co-owner of that company.
Well, see, Central Construction, we formed right after I left MK in '52.
I see.
And that was by accident.
And then you were a co-owner also of KV Beck Associates out of Seattle, Washington. When did you move to Boise, Idaho, or to Nampa, Idaho?
Well, my wife's folks came out here in the height of the Depression in 1937 from Loop City, Nebraska. And Leah had a job back in Nebraska, $14 a week as a chief bookkeeper for Fairmont Creamery Company. And she stayed. And so when I'd come down here to these meetings with MK, we'd fly down in the company airplane and we'd go to the meeting. We went we'd always stay in the Boise Hotel. They put us up in the Boise Hotel and they always had a big dance and that. Well, when we was here, I didn't know anything about Nampa, but we would rent a car and come over to see her folks. That was about once a year. Then, after I left them and went to Brazil for Foley, my oldest son wanted to finish high school in the States. And we said, you want to go back to Seattle where our home is at? Because my mother was widowed and going to stay with him. No, he wanted to go to Nampa where his grandfather was at, because he could drive at 14. So I came to Nampa and I looked around for an apartment. And then in the time that I come up here, the apartments in Nampa were few and far between. I finally asked my father-in-law, I said, I got to get back to Brazil. I said, is there a realtor here? And he said, yes. Giese. They're no longer around, Giese Realtor. I went down to them and said, "Do you have something here, a house or anything?" They say, "Yes, we have a little house, 2 bedrooms, single bath, a carport, single carport, out next to the new high school." The new high school was just built then, you know. So I said, "Let's go look at it." And I said, "It's just what I want." So I said, "How much money?" And he told me, and I wrote him a check for it. I left, my mother came out, and my oldest son stayed with her, and my youngest son, 8 years later, stayed with her through the I kept that house. I added another bathroom and a carport.
Is that where you live today?
That's where, and I kept the house, even stood idle some of the time, because when I retired, I had a condominium in the desert, and I belonged to Bermuda Duns Country Club. And we would, this winter time, down there and come up in the summer here. Well, in '94, I made a statement. I always played in the golf tournament, the Bermuda Triangle, which was a big golf tournament down in the desert. And I said, the day I win that, I'm quitting. I won it in '94 and I quit. I came up to Nampa, and I've never been back into the state of California since.
So that's when you moved here? It was in '94?
Yeah, '94. I came up here. And, well, and my wife's folks are still alive, and her brother and sister are still here. So I just got involved in the city.
Right.
Got involved in fighting with the school board.
Well, you know, you've had such an incredible life. I'm so glad, and we're very honored that you took the time to come to the Warhawk Air Museum today and let us preserve your Morrison Knutson history, your history about building these airfields and setting up the various camps throughout Alaska during World War II, which of course were so critical to our security. We are honored that we were able to have this opportunity to preserve that history. I wish we had the time to go for many, many more hours, because your life has been so fascinating. Maybe you could come back another time and we could start another film and finish this up, but I think it would take days to do so. So thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it.